Hello, my name is Gerald Golub. I'm reading a story by Mark Twain, and it's called Jim Smiley and His Jumping Frog. It starts out, Dear Mr. Ward, Dear Sir, I called on good-natured, garrulous old Simon Wheeler, and I inquired about your friend Leonidas W. Smiley, as you requested me to do, and I hereunto append the result. If you can get any information out of it, you are cordially welcome to it. I have a lurking suspicion that your Leonidas W. Smiley is a myth, that you never knew such a personage, and that you only conjectured that if I asked you, old Wheeler, about him, it would remind him of his infamous Jim Smiley, and he would go to work and bore me nearly to death with some infernal reminiscence of him as long as and tedious as it would be useless to me. If that was your design, Mr. Ward, it will gratify you to know that it succeeded. I found Simon Wheeler dozing comfortably by the barroom stove of the little old dilapidated tavern in the ancient mining camp of Boomerang, and I noticed that he was fat and bald-headed and had an expression of winning gentleness and simplicity upon his tranquil countenance. He roused up and gave me a good day. I told him a friend of mine had commissioned me to make some inquiries about a cherished companion of his boyhood named Leonidas W. Smiley. Reverend Leonidas W. Smiley, a young minister of the gospel, who he had heard was at one time a resident of this village of Boomerang. I added that if Mr. Wheeler could tell me anything about this Reverend Leonidas W. Smiley, I would feel under many obligations to him. Simon Wheeler backed me into a corner and blockaded me there with his chair, and then sat down and reeled off the monotonous narrative which follows this paragraph. He never smiled, he never frowned, he never changed his voice from the quiet, gentle flowing key to which he turned the initial sentence. He never betrayed the slightest suspicion of enthusiasm. But all through the interminable narrative, there ran a vein of impressive earnestness of sincerity which showed me plainly that so far from his imagining that there was anything ridiculous or funny about the story, he regarded it as a really important matter and admired its two heroes as men of transcendent genius and finesse. To me, the spectacle of a man drifting serenely along through such a queer yarn without ever smiling was exquisitely absurd. As I said before, I asked him to tell me what he knew of Reverend Leonidas W. Smiley, and he replied as follows. I let him go on his own way and never interrupted him once. There was a feller here once by the name of Jim Smiley in the winter of '49, or maybe it was the spring of '50. I don't recollect exactly. Somehow, though, what makes me think it was one of or the other is because I remember the big flume wasn't finished when he first come to the camp. But anyway, he was a curious man about always betting on anything that turned up you ever see. If he could get anybody to bet on the other side, and if he couldn't, he'd change sides. Anyway, that suited the other man would suit him. Anyway, just so he's got a bet, he was satisfied, but still was a lucky, uncommon lucky. He must always come out winner. He was always ready and laying for a chance. There couldn't be no solitary thing mentioned, but what that feller offered to bet on it, and take any side you please, as I was just telling you. If there was a horse race, you'd finish him flush, or you'd find him busted at the end of it. If there was a dog fight, he'd bet on it. If there was a cat fight, he'd bet on it. If there was a chicken fight, he'd bet on it. Why, if there was two birds sitting on a fence, he would bet you which one would fly first. Or if there was a camp meeting, he would be there regular to bet on Parson Walker, which he judged to be the best exhorter about here. So he was too, and a good man. If he even seen a straddle bug start to go anywheres, he would bet you how long it would take him to get wherever he was going to. And if you took him up, he would follow that straddle bug to Mexico. But he would find out where he was bound for and how long he was on the road. Lots of the boys were here has seen that Smiley and can tell you about him. Well, it never made no difference to him. He would bet on anything. The dangdest feller, Parson Walker's wife, laid very sick once for a good while, and it seemed as if they weren't going to save her. But one morning he came in and Smiley asked him how she was, and he said she was considerable better, thank the Lord for his infinite mercy, and coming on so smart that with the blessing of Providence she'd get well yet. And Smiley, before he thought, says, well, I'll risk 2.5 that she don't anyway. This year, Smiley had a mare. The boy called her the 15-minute nag, but that was only in fun, because of course she was faster than that, and he used to win money on that horse. For all she was so slow and always had the asthma, or the distemper, or the consumption, or something of that kind. They used to give her 200 or 300 yard start and then pass her underway. But always at the fag end of the race, she'd get excited and desperate like, and come cavorting and spraddling up and straddling her legs around. Limber sometimes in the air and sometimes out to one side amongst the fences, and kicking up the more dust and raising more racket with her coughing and sneezing and blowing her nose, and always fetch up and stand just about a neck ahead as near as you could cipher it down. And he had little small bull pup that to look at him you'd think he weren't worth a cent, but to sit around and look ornery and lay for chance to steal something. But as soon as money was up on him, he was a different dog. His underjaw began to stick out like the forecastle of a steamboat, and his teeth would uncover and his shine savage like the furnaces. And a dog might tackle him and bullyrag him and bite him and throw him over his shoulder 2 or 3 times. And Andrew Jackson, which was the name of the pup, Andrew Jackson would never let on, but what he was satisfied and he hadn't expected nothing else. And the bets being doubled and doubled on the other side all the time, till the money was all up, and then all of a sudden he would grab the other dog just by the joint of his hind legs and freeze to it. Not a chaw, you understand, but only just a grip, and hang it on till they throwed up the sponge. It was a year Smiley always came out a winner on that pup, till he harnessed a dog once that didn't have no hind legs because they'd been sawed off in a circular saw, and when the thing had gone along far enough and the money was all up, and he came to make a snatch for his pet Holt, he saw in a minute how he'd been imposed on and how the other dog had him in the door, so to speak, and he peered surprised, and then he looked sort of discouraged like and didn't try no more to win the fight. So he got sucked out bad. He gave Smiley a look as much as to say his heart was broke, and it was his fault for putting up a dog that hadn't no hind legs for him to take hold, which was his main dependence in a fight. And then he limped off a piece and lay down and died. It was a good pup, was that Andrew Jackson, and it would have made a name for himself if he'd lived, for the stuff was in him. And he had genius. I know it because he hadn't no opportunities to speak out, and it didn't stand to reason that a dog could make such a fight as he could under them circumstances. If he hadn't no talent, it always makes me feel sorry when I think of that last fight of his and the way it turned out. Well, this year Smiley had a rat terriers and chicken cocks and tomcats and all them kind of things till you couldn't rest, and you couldn't fetch nothing for him to bet on, but he'd match you. He catched a frog one day and took him home and said he calculated to educate him, and so he never done nothing for 3 months but set his backyard and learned that frog to jump. And you bet you did learn him to. He'd give him a little hunch behind, and the next minute you'd see the frog whirling in the air like a donut. See him turn one somersault or maybe a couple if he got a good start, and come down flat-footed and all right like a cat. He got him up so in the matter of catching flies, and kept him in practice so constant that he nailed a fly every time as far as he could see him. Smiley said all a frog wanted was education, and he could do almost anything. And I believe him. Why, I've seen him set Daniel Webster down here on his floor. Daniel Webster was the name of the frog, and sing out, "Flies, Daniel, flies." And quicker than you could wink, he'd spring straight up and snake a fly off in the counter there, and flop down on the floor against as solid as a gob of mud, and fall to scratching the side of his head with his hind foot, as indifferent as if he had no idea he'd done any more any frog might do. You never see a frog so modest and straightforward as he was, for all he was so gifted. And when it came to a fair and square jumping on a dead level, he could get over more ground at one straddle than any animal of his breed you ever see. Jumping on a dead level was his strong suit, you understand. And when it came to that, Smiley would ante up money on him as long as he had a red. Smiley was a monstrous proud of his frog, and well he might be, for fellers that had traveled and been everywheres all said he laid over any frog that ever they see. Well, Smiley kept the beast in a little lattice box, and he used to fetch him down sometimes and lay for a bet. One day a feller, a stranger in the camp he was, came across him with his box and says, "What might it be that they've got in the box?" And Smiley says, sort of indifferent, like, it might be a parrot or it might be a canary, maybe, but it ain't. It's only just a frog. And the feller took it and looked at it careful and turned it around this way and that and says, so 'tis. Well, what's she good for? Well, Smiley says, easy and careless. He's good enough for one thing, I should judge. He can outjump any frog in Calaveras County. The feller took the box again and took another long, particular look and give it back to Smiley and says, very deliberate, well, I don't see no points about that frog that's any better than any other frog. Maybe you don't, says Smiley. Maybe you understand frogs and maybe you don't understand them. Maybe you've had experience and maybe you ain't, only a mature, as it were. Anyways, I've got my opinion and I'll risk $40 that he can outjog any frog in Calaveras County. And the feller studied a minute and then he says, kinder sad like, well, I'm only a stranger here and I ain't got no frog, but if I had a frog, I'd bet you. And then Smiley says, that's all right, that's all right. If you'll hold my box a minute, I'll go and get you a frog. And so the feller took the box and put up his $40 along with Smiley's and sat down to wait. So he sat there a good minute thinking to himself, and then he got the frog out of the prized his mouth open and took a teaspoon and filled him full of quail shot, filled him pretty near up to his chin, and set him on the floor. Smiley, he went out to the swamp and slopped around in the mud for a long time, and finally he catched the frog, fetched him in, and gave him to his feller and says, now, if you're ready for him alongside of Daniel with this forepaws just even with Daniel's, and I'll give the word. Then he says, 1, 2, 3, jump. And him and the feller touched up the frogs from behind, and the new frog hopped off lively, but Daniel give a heave and hoisted up his shoulders so like a Frenchman, but it wasn't no use. He couldn't budge. He was planted as solid as an anvil, and he couldn't no more stir than if he was anchored out. Smiley was a good deal surprised, and he was disgusted too, but he couldn't have no idea what the matter was, of course. The feller took the money and started away, and when he was going out the door, he sort of jerked his thumb over his shoulder this way at Daniel and says, very deliberate, well, I don't see no points about that frog that's any better than any other frog. Smiley, he stood scratching his head and looking down at Daniel a long time, and at last he says, I do wonder what in the nation that frog throwed off, for I wonder if there ain't something the matter with him. Here 'pears to look mighty baggy somehow. And he catched Daniel by the nape of the neck and lifted him up and says, why, blame my cats if he don't weigh 5 pounds, and turned him upside down, and he belched out about a double handful of shot. And then he was the maddest man. He set the frog down and took out after the feller, but he never catched him. And here Simon Wheeler heard his name called from the front yard and got up to go see what was happened, and turned to me, and he moved away and said, just sit there, you are, stranger, and rest easy. I ain't going to be gone a second. But by your leave, I don't think that a continuation of the history of the enterprising vagabond Jim Smiley would be likely to afford so much information concerning the Reverend Theodus W. Smiley, and so I started away. At the door, I met the sociable Wheeler returning, and the buttonholed me and recommended, well, 'tis your Smiley had a yeller, one-eyed cow that didn't have no tail, only just a short stump with a bananer, and oh, curse and his afflicted cow, I muttered good-naturedly, and bidding the old gentleman good day, I departed. Yours truly, Mark Twain. And that's the end of the story. Thank you very much.